My parents skipped my emergency surgery to watch my sister's dance recital. Now, they want me to co-sign a loan after she practically destroyed their house throwing a party. I laughed and hung up. I was 16 when my appendix burst during a basketball game. Coach Miller called 911 while I was curled up on the gym floor in agony. The ER doctor told me I had maybe an hour before it went septic. They needed a parent to sign off on the surgery, but Coach Miller had to call my parents 12 times before my mom finally picked up. She told him they were at Qley's winter showcase and couldn't leave because Qley had a solo in the second act. A solo? My appendix was literally poisoning me, and my parents couldn't miss a 3-minute dance number. Coach Miller ended up signing as my emergency guardian so the surgery could proceed. I woke up alone in a recovery room with an IV in my arm and a 6-inch incision. No parents, no sister, just Coach Miller asleep in the chair next to my bed because he refused to leave me alone. My parents showed up the next morning. My mom brought a teddy bear from the gift shop, kissed my forehead, and said how scary it must have been. When I asked why they didn't come, my dad actually shrugged. Qley's been practicing for months. We couldn't just walk out during her big moment. The coach had it handled. A man who'd known me for one season cared more about whether I lived or died than my own parents. Qley never even sent a text. I moved out at 18 with $400 and a duffel bag. I worked warehouse shifts at night while taking community college classes by day. I transferred to a state school on a partial scholarship and finished my degree while working 30-hour weeks. I slept in my car twice when I couldn't make rent and showered at the campus gym. By 26, I had a solid career, a small apartment that was actually mine, and $22,000 in savings. Every cent earned the hard way. Qley got a different life. My parents paid her full tuition at a private university, bought her a car for graduation, and let her move back home rent-free after she dropped out of her second master's program. She was 27 and still living in her childhood bedroom. My parents called it finding herself. Then, 3 weeks ago, my mom called me sobbing. Qley had thrown a massive party while my parents were on vacation. Over 80 people she'd met through an influencer group she was trying to start. And someone knocked a candle into the curtains. The entire first floor suffered smoke and water damage. The kitchen was destroyed, and the living room was gutted. My dad's home office, containing 30 years of files, was gone. Insurance covered part of it, but not the $9,000 worth of woodworking tools stolen from the garage during the party. Total out-of-pocket costs hit $40,000. My parents needed a loan, but their credit was wrecked from a refinance they'd done to pay off Qley's previous student loans. They needed a cosigner. You have great credit, my dad said. This is a family emergency. We just need your signature. What about Qley? I asked. She caused this. Qley doesn't have credit. She's never had a real job. You know that. Yeah, I knew, because they made sure she never had to. I'm not co-signing anything, I said. Hey, my mom's voice started shaking. How can you say no? This is our home. Your childhood home. The childhood home where you left me to almost die so you could watch Qley dance. That home? That was years ago. You need to let that go. I let it go when I moved out with $400. I let it go when I slept in my car. And I'm letting this go too. My dad grabbed the phone. You're being selfish. We never asked you for anything. You never asked because you never thought about me long enough to need anything. Qley burned the house down. Make her figure it out. She's your sister. And Coach Miller was a stranger, but he was the one in the chair when I woke up. Not you. I hung up and let the phone ring. That night, Qley posted a selfie in front of the charred living room with the caption, "Worst week ever. Please send good vibes." She tagged a GoFundMe. She actually listed herself as the victim. The silence after that phone call was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. I sat in my apartment, my quiet, paid-for, smoke-free apartment, and watched the dust motes dance in the light of a lamp I'd bought with my own overtime pay. For the first time, I didn't feel the old, familiar knot of guilt in my stomach. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. 2 days later, the flying monkeys started. My Aunt Sarah called first. She's my mom's sister, the kind of person who thinks family is an obligation that overrides morality. "Leo, honey, I heard about the house," she began, her voice dripping with that manufactured sweetness. "It's devastating. Your mother is a wreck. She's staying in a motel because the smell of smoke is too much for her asthma." "That's unfortunate, Aunt Sarah," I said, leaning back in my office chair. "Maybe she should ask Qley to help pay for a nicer hotel since Qley's the one who turned the living room into a bonfire." "Now, don't be like that. Qley is fragile. She's having a mental health crisis over this. She feels so guilty." "Guilty enough to get a job?" I asked. "Guilty enough to sell that car my parents bought her?" The line went quiet for a beat. "You've become so cold, Leo. We all noticed it after you moved out. You just detached." "I didn't detach, Sarah. I was detached. There's a difference." I hung up on her too. Then came the messages from Qley. Not apologies, demands. She sent me a rambling text about how unfair it was that I was hoarding my wealth while our parents suffered. She actually used the word hoarding. "I have a modest savings account meant for a down payment on a house and an emergency fund because I know better than anyone that no one is coming to save me if my life catches fire. You think you're so much better than us because you have a fancy job," her text read, "but you're just a traitor. Mom is crying every night. Dad is talking about selling his car. Is that what you want? To see them on the street?" I didn't reply. Instead, I went through my old photos on my laptop. I found the one Coach Miller took of me the day I was discharged from the hospital. I looked like a ghost. Pale, thin, hunched over from the pain in my abdomen. In the background, you could see his wife, who had brought me a homemade casserole because she knew my parents hadn't stocked my fridge. I scrolled further back. Graduation. Me standing alone in my gown because my parents were at Qley's regional dance qualifiers 3 states away. They'd sent a text. "So proud. Celebrating with Qley now. We'll do dinner when we get back. XO." We never did dinner. I realized then that my parents didn't want a son. They wanted an insurance policy. They had spent 20 years investing everything into the golden child. And now that the investment had literally gone up in flames, they expected the forgotten child to cover the loss. On Friday, my dad showed up at my office. I saw him through the glass partition of the lobby. He looked older, tired, his jacket smelling faintly of soot. My heart gave a tiny, traitorous tug, but I pushed it down. I walked out to meet him. "Leo," he said, reaching out to pat my shoulder. I stepped back just enough that he missed. He cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Can we talk? Just man to man? If this is about the loan, Dad, the answer is still no. It's not just the loan," he sighed, sitting on one of the lobby chairs. "The GoFundMe Qley started, it only raised $400. People are being cruel. They're saying she's irresponsible. The neighbors are complaining about the soot. The city is threatening fines. Because she is irresponsible, Dad. And the neighbors are right. It's a residential street, not a nightclub. She was trying to build a career," he snapped, the old defensiveness returning. "She's an influencer, Leo. That's how the world works now. You have to have an image. You have to host events. She's 27, I said flatly. She doesn't have an image. She has a bedroom in a house she burned down. If I did what she did at 16, you would have grounded me until I was 30. You would have made me work 3 jobs to pay you back. Why is it different for her? My dad looked at his shoes. Because she's sensitive. You were always tough, Leo. You always figured things out. We never had to worry about you. You didn't have to worry about me because you chose not to, I said, my voice rising just enough to make a passing coworker glance over. I wasn't tough. I was neglected. I figured it out because the alternative was starving or ending up on the street. You mistook my survival for strength so you could ignore me with a clear conscience. He stood up, his face reddening. I didn't come here to be lectured by my own son. We are in a hole, Leo. A deep one. We need $40,000 to make the house livable again. If you won't co-sign, give us the $22,000 you have in savings. We'll pay you back. I swear on your mother's life. I actually laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was just pure, shocked disbelief. You want my entire life savings? The money I earned while you were paying for Qley's 3rd attempt at a degree? The money I saved while I was sleeping in a Ford Focus? You have a good job. You'll earn it back in a year. No, I said, stepping closer to him. Here is what's going to happen. You're going to go home. You're going to tell Qley to sell her car. You're going to tell her to get a job, any job, at the mall, at a cafe, anywhere. And you're going to take the insurance money you did get and fix one room at a time, like I did with my life. You're heartless, he whispered. I'm the product of my upbringing, Dad. You taught me that your children's emergencies aren't worth missing a dance for. I'm just following your lead. He walked out without another word. That evening, I blocked all of them. My mom, my dad, Qley, and Aunt Sarah. I sat on my balcony and opened a beer. My phone didn't ring. No one was asking for anything. No one was telling me I was selfish for wanting to survive. I thought about Coach Miller. He's retired now, living out in the country. I pulled up my contacts and called him. Hey, Coach, I said when he picked up. It's Leo. Yeah, I'm doing great. Hey, do you still like that specific brand of bourbon? I'd like to send you a bottle. Just because. We talked for an hour. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't ask me to co-sign a loan. He just asked if I was happy and if I was taking care of myself. As I hung up, I looked at the Golden Child's GoFundMe one last time. It was still at $400. I felt a fleeting moment of pity for my parents, trapped in a ruined house with a monster they'd created. But then I remembered the cold gym floor, the 12 unanswered phone calls, and the 3-minute solo. I went inside, locked my door, and slept like a baby. The following weeks were a masterclass in desperation. Since I had blocked their numbers, the assault moved to my LinkedIn and even my work email. My mother sent a message titled Urgent Family Update that was just a series of photos of the mold growing in their damp, gutted kitchen, and she was trying to trigger the fixer in me, the son who had spent his life making things work so they wouldn't have to notice him. It didn't work. I deleted the emails without replying. Then, the inevitable happened. About 2 months after the influencer bonfire, I was leaving my apartment to head to the gym when I saw a familiar, beaten-up SUV parked illegally at the curb. It was Qley's graduation car. She was leaning against the hood, wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. When she saw me, she didn't lead with an apology. She led with a grievance. You blocked Mom, she said, her voice sharp. She's been having panic attacks, Leo. Do you even care? I care about my peace of mind, Qley, which is why I blocked her. What are you doing here? She pulled her sunglasses down. Her eyes were puffy. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. Dad couldn't keep up with the refinance payments and the motel bills. They're losing the house. Our house. It's their house, Qley. And they're losing it because they spent 30 years subsidizing your lifestyle instead of maintaining a safety net. How can you be so cruel? She hissed, stepping toward me. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. I was trying to network, to build something. You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad actually liked being around me. I stopped. I actually dropped my gym bag and looked at her. Jealous? Qley, I spent my childhood watching you perform for an audience of 2 people who were deaf to my existence. I'm not jealous. I'm exhausted. You're 27 years old. If the house is being foreclosed, get a job and help them rent an apartment. I can't! She wailed, and for a second, she looked like the 16-year-old girl who didn't send a text when I was in the hospital. I don't have a resume. I don't have experience. And besides, I have to be available for my brand deals. What brand deals? You have 3,000 followers and a charred living room. She flinched. We're moving. Mom and Dad are packing what's left. They're planning on coming here, Leo, to your place, just until they get on their feet. A cold shiver went down my spine. Not of fear, but of sheer, unadulterated resolve. No, they aren't. You have a spare room. I have an office. And the answer is no. If they show up here, I'm calling the police. I am not the retirement plan for people who forgot I existed until they ran out of money. Qley looked at me like I was a monster. To her, I was just a walking ATM that had suddenly developed a personality. You'd really let your own parents go to a shelter? They have siblings. They have friends. They have Qley's big future. Use one of those. I walked past her, got into my car, and drove away. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but it wasn't from weakness. It was the adrenaline of finally, fully closing a door that had been ajar for a decade. The move-in attempt happened 3 days later. I saw them on my Ring doorbell camera while I was at work. My dad was hauling a suitcase. My mom was holding a box of what looked like kitchen supplies. They were pressing the buzzer over and over. I didn't speak through the intercom. I didn't give them the satisfaction of an audience. I called the building manager and told him there were unauthorized individuals loitering in the lobby and attempting to gain access to my unit. 10 minutes later, I watched on my phone as the building security escorted them out. My mother was crying, gesturing wildly at my door. My father looked defeated. His shoulders slumped in a way that might have broken me 5 years ago. Now it just looked like a natural consequence of a lifetime of bad choices. They eventually moved into Aunt Sarah's basement. The same Aunt Sarah who called me cold now had to deal with Qley's fragile mental health and my mother's asthma-friendly demands 24/7. The golden child experiment finally hit a wall. Last I heard from a distant cousin, Qley had to take a job at a local grocery store to help pay for Aunt Sarah's utilities. She lasted 4 days before the stress was too much. My parents are currently blaming the economic climate and my betrayal for their situation. As for me, I'm still working. I'm still saving. But I finally stopped sleeping with one eye open, waiting for the next family emergency. A few weeks ago, I went back to my old high school. I found Coach Miller's name on a plaque in the gym. I stood on that floor, right where my appendix had decided to check out, and I realized I wasn't that kid anymore. I wasn't waiting for a phone call that would never be answered. I am my own emergency contact, and I'm the only one who needs to sign off on my life. A few months passed, and the silence from my family was a gift I hadn't realized I could afford. I spent my weekends doing things that didn't require permission or a witness. I hiked, I read, and I finally started that woodworking course I'd been eyeing. It felt poetic in a way, learning to build things with my hands while the house I grew grew up in was being stripped for parts. I heard through the grapevine, mostly through cousins who still felt the need to update me, that the foreclosure was finalized. My parents had moved what was left of their belongings into a storage unit they could barely afford and officially took up residence in Aunt Sarah's basement. Sarah, who had been my parents' biggest advocate in the family is everything campaign. I was finding out exactly what that meant when everything included a 27-year-old who refused to do her own laundry and a sister-in-law who complained about the thread count of the basement sheets. Then the final move happened. I was at work when I received a notification from a real estate app I'd forgotten to delete. The house was on the market as a fixer-upper. I scrolled through the photos. It was jarring to see the rooms of my childhood stripped of furniture, the walls stained with soot, the kitchen a skeleton of what it once was. It looked like a corpse. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove back to the old neighborhood. I sat in my car at the curb, the engine idling. The for sale sign was crooked in the overgrown grass. I looked at the window of my old bedroom, the one I'd spent so many nights in, wondering why I wasn't enough to make him stay home for one night. A car pulled up behind me. It was a sleek black sedan. A man stepped out, a developer, likely, looking to flip the tragedy into a profit. He looked at the house with calculating eyes, seeing nothing but square footage and potential ROI. He didn't see the ghost of a boy clutching his side in pain. He didn't see the years of quiet resentment baked into the drywall. I realized then that the house didn't matter. It was just wood and nails, and most of it was rotten anyway. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I usually ignore them, but something told me to pick up. Leo? It was my mother. Her voice sounded thin, stripped of its usual performative vibrance. Mom, I'm calling from Sarah's landline. I just wanted to say that the house sold today. The bank took most of it, but there's a little bit left. Not much. A few thousand. I waited. I knew the rhythm of this song. We gave it to Qley, she whispered, for a deposit on an apartment. She needs her own space, Leo. She's not doing well in the basement. She needs a win. I didn't get angry. I didn't even sigh. I just felt a profound sense of relief that I was no longer part of that equation. Okay, Mom, you aren't going to yell? You aren't going to tell me how unfair it is? No, I said, looking at the for sale sign one last time. Because it doesn't have anything to do with me. You're giving her the last of your resources to keep her afloat for another 3 months. That's your choice. I'm just glad I'm not the one you're asking to build the raft next time. We're your parents, Leo, she said, and a hint of the old fire returning. We did our best. If that was your best, Mom, then I'm even more impressed with how I turned out. I hung up and blocked Sarah's landline, too. I drove away from that street for the last time. I went home to my apartment where the air was clear and the bills were paid. I made myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just a steak and some greens, and sat in the quiet. I wasn't a traitor. I wasn't cold. I was just finished. I'm 28 now. My savings have crossed the $30,000 mark. I'm looking at small houses in a town 2 hours away, somewhere with a lot of trees and no influencer groups. Every now and then, I see a notification on social media from someone who hasn't been blocked yet. Qley is still posting. She's in a tiny studio apartment now trying to sell wellness tea to her 3,000 followers. My parents are still in the basement. The golden child is still waiting for her solo, but the audience has finally left the theater. And me? I'm finally off the clock. I'm not the emergency contact. I'm not the safety net. I'm just a man with a quiet life and a clean conscience. And for the first time in my life, that's more than enough. The aftermath of the house sale didn't bring the dramatic closure I expected. Instead, it was a slow, agonizing fade into the background of a life I no longer recognized. Aunt Sarah's family-first philosophy lasted exactly 4 months before the reality of hosting 3 grown adults in a finished basement took its toll. I found out through a cousin that Sarah eventually gave my parents an ultimatum. Qley had to pay rent or they all had to leave. My parents, true to form, I didn't ask Qley to step up. They asked for more time. Sarah, a woman who prides herself on her immaculate garden and quiet Sunday mornings, finally cracked when she found Qley filming a Get Ready With Me video in her primary bathroom, using Sarah's expensive perfumes as props. They were evicted from the basement 3 weeks ago. I didn't know until I received a certified letter in the mail. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw my father's handwriting on the envelope. I thought about throwing it away, but the fixer in me, the one I'm still trying to kill, made me open it. It wasn't a plea for money, it was a legal notice. They were suing me for filial support. Apparently, in our state, there are ancient, rarely used laws that suggest adult children have a financial obligation to their indigent parents. But my father had found a bottom-tier lawyer willing to take the case on a contingency basis. They were coming for my savings, my hoarded wealth, to fund their retirement because they had invested everything into my upbringing. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I called a lawyer I'd met through my firm, a shark named Elias, who specialized in family litigation. We met in a glass-walled office that overlooked the city. I handed him the papers. Elias skimmed them, a small, predatory smile playing on his lips. They're claiming you're their primary source of potential support while they are in a state of necessity, he said. It's a bold move. Usually, these cases require a showing that the parents actually provided a certain level of care and support to the child during their minority. They left me in a hospital to watch a dance recital, I said flatly. I have the medical records. I have the witness statement from my coach. I have tax returns showing I've been independent since I was 18. Good, Elias said. We don't just defend this, Leo. We bury it. The deposition took place in a cramped, neutral conference room. It was the first time I'd seen my parents and Qley in months. They looked diminished. My mom had stopped dyeing her hair. The gray was coming in sharp and jagged. My dad's suit was ill-fitting, smelling faintly of mothballs. Qley was there too, sitting behind them like a silent, pouting shadow scrolling on her phone. And their lawyer started with the narrative of the successful son abandoning his aging, homeless parents. He spoke about the sacrifices they made, the private school for Qley, the stable home, the years of dedication. Then it was our turn. Elias didn't lead with the house fire. He led with the appendix. He produced the hospital records from 10 years ago. He showed the phone logs, 12 calls to my parents' cell phones, all unanswered. He showed the signature on the emergency consent form. Coach Robert Miller. Mr. Vance, Elias said, looking at my father, on the night your son's internal organs were rupturing, where were you? My dad shifted in his seat. We were at a performance. We didn't know it was that serious. The hospital called you 12 times. The coach left 3 voicemails stating it was life-threatening. You didn't check your phone once in 3 hours? It was a theater, my mom chimed in, her voice trembling. We had the ringers off. It's common courtesy. Common courtesy, Elias repeated, his voice like ice. Is it common courtesy to leave a 16-year-old to face major surgery alone? To not show up until the next morning? To tell him, and I quote from the social worker's notes, that the coach had it handled? The room went silent. I looked at Qley. She finally looked up from her phone. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't wasn't self-interest. It looked like shame. Elias moved on. He produced my bank statements from college. He showed the weeks where I lived on $20. He showed the lack of any wire transfers, checks, or support from my parents during my entire adult life. He contrasted that with the $150,000 they had spent on Qley's tuition and lifestyle. You aren't asking for support, Elias concluded. You are asking for a refund on a child you never invested in. You spent your capital on a golden child who is currently unemployed and living off your sister's charity. My client owes you nothing but the silence he's already given you. The lawsuit was dropped a week later. Their lawyer realized there was no payday coming, only a public airing of their negligence. That was the final bridge. There's no coming back from a lawsuit. You can't sit at a Thanksgiving table with people who tried to use the law to rob you of your future. I officially moved last month. I bought a small 2-bedroom cottage in the mountains, and it has a workshop in the back where I spend my evenings turning raw wood into something useful, something solid. I invited Coach Miller and his wife up for the housewarming. We sat on the deck, the air smelling of pine and wood smoke, and we didn't talk about my parents once. I got a notification yesterday. Qley had started a new vlog series. The title was Starting Over, Living in a Van, Not by Choice. My parents are living with another distant relative in a different state. They've become a cautionary tale whispered at family reunions I no longer attend. I stood in my kitchen this morning making coffee in the pre-dawn quiet. I looked at the scar on my abdomen, a faded, jagged line that used to represent pain. Now it just looks like a map, a reminder of where I started, and the fact that I was the only one who made sure I got to where I am. I'm not the other child anymore. I'm not the backup plan. I'm just Leo, and for the first time in 28 years, that's the only person I have to be. The legal battle was the final cauterization of the wound. After the papers were withdrawn and the threats of filial support vanished into the ether, I felt a lightness that was almost dizzying. It was as if I'd been carrying a heavy, soot-stained trunk uphill for 12 years, and I finally just let go of the handle. I settled into my mountain cottage. The air up here is different, thin, sharp, and honest. There are no influencers in the woods, only the rhythmic sound of my chisel against oak, and the occasional visit from a neighbor who wants to trade a jar of honey for a repaired fence post. My life became quiet, and in that quiet, I found my own version of family. It started with a kid named Toby. He was 19, a local boy who'd been kicked out of his house for reasons that sounded all too familiar. Parents who prioritized their own spiritual journey over providing a stable environment. He was sleeping in his truck at the trailhead when I found him. I didn't take him in. I'm not a martyr, but I offered him work in my shop. I taught him how to sand, how to respect the grain of the wood, and how to measure twice so you don't have to cry once. One afternoon, while we were working on a dining table for a client, he stopped and looked at me. "Why are you helping me, Leo?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You don't even know me." I didn't look up from my plane. And because someone once sat in a chair next to my hospital bed when he didn't have to, I'm just paying the rent on that chair. A few weeks later, I got one last piece of news from the old life. It wasn't a call or a text. I'd changed my number and scrubbed my digital footprint. It was a physical letter, forwarded through 3 different addresses, eventually landing in my mailbox. It was from my sister Qley. The envelope was cheap, the paper lined and torn from a notebook. No designer logos, no brand aesthetic. "Leo, I'm not asking for money. I know I'm dead to you. I'm writing this because I finally watched the video Mom took of my solo that night. You know, the one in the hospital? I looked at their faces in the crowd. They weren't even watching me, Leo. They were on their phones. I'm probably checking the likes on the post Mom made about being a dance mom. I was a prop. I've always been a prop. You were the lucky one because you were invisible. At least you got to be real. I don't know who I am when the camera is off. The van broke down in Nebraska. Mom and Dad are staying with a cousin who charges them rent and they're miserable. I think I'm going to stay here and work at a diner. I'm tired of performing. I'm sorry for everything." I read it twice. I felt a flicker of something. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition of shared wreckage. We had both been raised in a house of mirrors. I had just been the only one brave enough to break them and walk out through the glass. I didn't reply. I couldn't. There was no bridge left to cross, and I didn't want to build one. I folded the letter. I walked over to my wood-burning stove and watched it turn to ash. That evening, Coach Miller called. He's older now, his voice a bit gravelly, but he still calls me son in a way that feels earned rather than inherited. "How's the mountain life, Leo?" "It's good, Coach. Quiet." "You coming down for the holidays?" "Martha's making that ham you like. She says if you don't show up, she's sending it by courier and charging you the shipping." I smiled, a real one that reached my eyes. "I'll be there, Coach. I'll bring the bourbon." "Good lad." "And Leo, I saw that table you finished on your website. You've got a gift for making things solid. Most people just want things to look good. You make them last." I hung up and looked around my home. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have a golden child wing or a room dedicated to forgotten trophies. It was just a house built on a foundation of hard work and self-respect. The scar on my side didn't ache anymore. The 12 missed calls were a distant static. I walked out onto my porch and watched the sun dip below the peaks, painting the sky in colors that no camera could ever truly capture. I was 28 years old. I had survived my family, survived the fire, and survived the golden child. I was no longer defined by who didn't show up. I was defined by the man who was standing right here, breathing the clean mountain air entirely and beautifully alone. I went back inside and got to work. I had a lot of things left to build.